I'm for annual Olympics at this point.
Yeah.
Like if we had them every summer, the world comes together.
That's great.
Yeah.
Los Angeles 2028 is going to be epic.
Yeah.
Instead, why don't we have a presidential race every year? And with that, let's do the podcast.
We will never give up. We will never concede. We'll be bigger, better, and bolder than ever before.
We are not going back.
Welcome to the Trump Trials Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and we have gotten the band back together. I'm in the studio with Rhonda, Colvin, and James Hohmann, and it's great to see you guys. To cut to the chase, the vibe is different. So much has changed in the last couple of weeks politically. Kamala Harris has a running mate now, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. She's holding huge rallies across the country, the likes of which Democrats couldn't have imagined just a few weeks ago. Her polling numbers are on the way up, notably with key demographics like Black voters and women. And the Trump campaign seems not to quite know how to respond, although Donald Trump is trying to take his message directly to the media this week. So on today's show, we'll dive into the palpable shift in the 2024 election. We'll talk about how Democrats are dealing with this moment of attention, how Republicans are responding, and we'll check in with Trump's legal troubles, which are still looming in the background. Let's start with the big news of the week. It's not Josh Shapiro. It's not Mark Kelly. It's not James Hohmann. It's another Minnesotan, Tim Walz, who will be on the trail with Vice President Kamala Harris. The race has really been reset. James, as a Minnesotan, Aaron Blake, who also does a podcast called The Campaign Moment here at the Washington Post. Aaron Blake is also a Minnesotan. Is this just like a really big moment for you guys?
It is. It's a huge moment. Although if Tim Walz becomes vice president, 3 of the last 6 Democratic VPs will have been Minnesotans.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that seems so uninteresting then.
Than the number 2 state, Indiana, which we keep track of in Minnesota. Rhonda's a Midwesterner, so she gets it.
I understand.
And Tim Walz does very much follow in the tradition of Hubert Humphrey, who was picked for vice president the year that Tim Walz was born, 1964.
I hate to say it, James, when you talk about Hubert Humphrey, you sound like you're like 100 years old. That's just you reaching into but thank you.
And Walter Mondale.
But here's something that's so interesting. So you've been a political reporter for how many years now? Like
almost 2 decades.
And you covered Tim Walz running for Congress.
I did.
So tell us, I just would love to hear about your early experiences covering him.
It's pretty amazing. It's funny because, Tim Walz was a high school teacher until 2006. And for those of us who grew up in the Midwest, very, very kind of archetypical. Some of my former high school teachers are probably watching and listening, and he reminds me very much of them. And he was, the defensive coach for the football team. And so he ran for Congress in 2006 against a guy who had won re-election 2 years earlier by 25 points. No one gave him any shot. I remember having lunch with Tim Walz in 2010, and I wrote a profile of him that year when he was trying to survive this red wave. And he told me that Rahm Emanuel wouldn't return his calls. He was then the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, later became Obama's White House Chief of Staff, wouldn't even return his calls until October 15th, 2006, just weeks before the election. He'd been working his butt off. A lot of his former students were going door to door in this rural southern Minnesota district. It kind of stretches right along the Iowa border. No one gave him a shot. And then all of a sudden, he was kind of peaking at just the right time and overtook this guy who was really caught off guard, Gil Guttenicht, the Republican congressman. And he very much kind of governed like a rural red district Democrat, voted with Democratic leadership on things like the Affordable Care Act.
Which at the time was considered to be a kind of a bold, potentially career-ending thing to do because a lot of Democrats who were in more conservative districts ended up losing re-election after taking that vote.
Yeah, and I flew to Minnesota and spent a day with him right after that really tough vote and watched him explaining it to voters, watched him with his wife. And, it did take some political courage to do that. And then he, interestingly, he barely won re-election in 2016. Hillary Clinton lost the district badly to Donald Trump, even though she carried Minnesota. And so that was what made him think, okay, this rural district I can't really win in anymore. I need to run statewide. And so that's when he really moved politically much further to the left. And he actually didn't get the party's endorsement. There was a Democratic state convention, and they picked someone more liberal than him. And so he challenged that person in a primary. There's a kind of a convention and then a primary, and he won with 40% of the vote. And that was the year he went from having an A rating from the NRA to an F rating, endorsed an assault weapons ban after Parkland, and wins re-election in 2018. His first term, he didn't do all that much as governor. You know, he had COVID. George Floyd was this, you know, there were a lot of protests, riots. And then his second term, Democrats get a 1-seat majority in the state Senate, and he decides not to waste any political capital, and he gets reelected. And they didn't have any Joe Manchins in their caucus. With a 1-seat majority in the state Senate, they pushed through like a progressive wish list of you know, the most ambitious things, cultural, social issues, economic, family, unions, all that kind of thing. And it really positioned him to become Harris's running mate. I mean, it's a remarkable story to go from, in 16 years, being a high school teacher at a public school in rural southern Minnesota to being one election away from being a heartbeat from the presidency.
Is it a parallel story of success to J.D. Vance? I mean, can Republicans say, hey, this is a guy who grew up impoverished, who wrote this really powerful book, Hillbilly Elegy, about his experience. You know, he got through law school at Yale, which we heard Tim Walz taking a dig at him about this past week. And he's risen in a way that J.D. Vance talks about people where he comes from not really being able to even dream about and envision. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny because I have spent a lot of time with both J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, and they could not be more different. They do have very different personalities, worldviews. I think J.D. said yesterday that the only similarity between him and Tim Walz is that they're both white guys from the Midwest. I think that Harris likes the contrast of, like, here's, you know, they both like Diet Mountain Dew as well. I think Harris likes the contrast of, here's a blue collar guy who sort of is what J.D. Vance wants to present as, and Tim Walz he's the one who started the kind of Republicans are weird branding, that messaging that took. He's a great messenger because he can sort of drive a message and seem like he's having fun while doing it, but also that he's being sort of lighthearted and not angry. He is he's very good at kind of making you laugh as he's making an attack on the other side, which is a skill.
Rhonda, what do you see him as bringing to the ticket? Why did Kamala Harris choose him? What does she hope that he does?
Well, one thing is that we've been hearing is that she really prioritizes connections with people, that she felt they had a connection, they had chemistry, and that's something she could work with. I think we remember some of the reporting when she was, when the Biden ticket was elected, you know, we didn't quite know what her portfolio would be. It didn't seem to be matching up with what Biden was doing. So there was all of this kind of palace intrigue. But I think she wants someone to be a partner, at least that's what she's saying, and she finds that he is that likable person and that he can also be sold to the American public as this common man. I think also what's advantageous too somewhat for the Trump side, but for Harris as well, having picked someone who no one really knew. I mean, I remember talking at the RNC about some of the polling that showed that a lot of people didn't know who J.D. Vance was, but he is a sitting U.S. Senator right now, so he does have some sort of national recognition. He also wrote a book that turned into a movie, but Walz had less recognition. A lot of people were like, wait, who? And, you know, Googling to find out who is this guy, even though he was on her short list. But I think that there's benefit in that because, yes, they are able to craft who they want him to be. But it also kind of, it's always interesting in politics to see someone be that dark horse who no one knows. He came up, as James just explained, in his congressional career as someone who was like, wait, where did he come from? So,
and he was on sort of modest, hardworking committees, right?
Right. The Ag Committee, Veteran Affairs, kind of tried to make a track into being for veterans' rights.
But there are like committees you get on if you have like big ambitions, and those are not necessarily the committees, right?
Those are not the flashy committees
but
that
you can
usually
make a difference there. But
they can make a difference, especially with the Ag Committee, because he helped draft some of the farm bills, which are reauthorization bills that take a lot of negotiation. So it appears that he does have some ability to work across the aisle. But he just comes out of nowhere in his political career, and I think that that's going to perhaps help.
I love that point because I think, you know, not that long ago, 2 months ago, this was a race. It was a rematch of 2020. It was characters we felt like we knew, even people
Yeah, the
who don't
movie we
follow
already
politics.
saw.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the movie we already saw, and there is.
It's not even like a sequel. It's
Right.
like the same exact movie.
And I think like people like love a new character, and there is the kind of this new character energy. It's like a new franchise, and there's this excitement around Tim Walz because he does feel like fresh. And even Kamala Harris, we're seeing her in a way that we didn't see her when she ran in 2020. We didn't see her as VP because she was intentionally sort of the best supporting actress instead of the main character. And
now
she's out there.
Yeah, and my friend Audie Cornish, who is on CNN, made this great point that, she's really framing him as Coach Walz. Kamala Harris, not Audie. She's calling him Coach Walz, pointing out that he was a coach for so long. And Audie pointed out that like a coach is the supporting person. Strong, important, right, essential, but not the star. The coach is helping the star shine.
Yeah.
And Kamala Harris needs someone who can be like her wingman, her support team, and not someone who's going to try to outshine her, take over. I think especially as a woman of color who might be the first woman president of the United States, you need someone who you can rely on and who will be very positive in that supportive role.
That's a really good point.
And be comfortable with that.
It's such a contrast to Josh Shapiro. And we do know from our reporting that Josh Shapiro came into he and Tim Walz and Mark Kelly all sat down with the vice president at the Naval Observatory, her residence on Sunday. And Shapiro, who's 51, even Walz is 60, was kind of talking about what his portfolio would be and wanting to ask questions. And he, has very clear presidential ambitions. And Tim Walz said, I'm not angling for the presidency. I'll do whatever you want. I'll be your wingman. I'll be your backup. And he just, then Shapiro even like called a top Harris aide after the interview to ask more questions and inquire about what his
Isn't
conditions.
that what they say you should do in a job interview? Express a lot of interest, maybe.
Send a thank you note.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it is like, so I think there is
it's
something to be said for
different
that, which Harris is getting someone who's like, it feels a comfort level with and isn't going to be threatening to her.
Okay. Yeah. Was there the same excitement among Republicans about J.D. Vance? All those words that you used, James, to describe how people are feeling about Tim Walz, bringing in new character energy, bringing in this new dynamic, bringing in curiosity. Did J.D. Vance have that same effect among Republicans?
No. I mean, he didn't. I'm interested in your take on that. Yeah. I think Vance is a lot of people in the Republican elite, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, didn't want him because he doesn't support funding for Ukraine. He doesn't support unregulated free trade. I think people sort of felt like Trump was picking this guy who they do kind of feel like they know because of hillbilly elegy, but also who wants to take the Republican Party in a very different direction. No one has that sense about Tim Walz. I think maybe some progressives feel like he's the more liberal choice than Josh Shapiro would have been, and they like that. But I don't think J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance excited like the hardcore MAGA types, but even then, I think they don't really see him as one of them. I think they kind of see him as a phony. So it does feel like J.D. Vance hasn't brought anything to the ticket, as we've talked about in our previous episode. Like Trump himself was saying, no one cares about, no one cares about VP picks. They don't matter, which is a sign that I think even Trump recognizes Vance.
Yeah,
do that.
And your question about did it excite the Republicans? I remember the conversations I had at the RNC, and I kept hearing delegates say, I wish Trump would have picked Senator Scott. And that after like the third time I heard it, I'm like, wow, did Trump make a mistake in this? Did he try to overcalculate the blue wall strategy? Did he not expand his base? Because that's really the question here. This race in November is going to come down to just, a handful of votes in these really big states. And if you're not adding anyone to your coalition, it could just be a repeat of 2020. And with the Walz pick, it does seem as if Harris knew where, her limits were, where her appeal ended, and where he could come in and sort of fill those gaps. So that could add a little bit to her base. But yeah, I just remember those conversations and hearing people tell me, well, I wish he would have picked Tim Scott.
And you have to remember the context. It's easy even for us to forget we were there.
Mm-hmm.
Like it felt like Trump couldn't be stopped that week. He had just survived this assassination attempt.
Biden only left the race 18 days ago.
Right, exactly. Biden was still the nominee and was
been
insisting
3
he wasn't
weeks.
going anywhere. Yeah. And so you think about it. People I was talking to at the convention were talking about what jobs they would have in a Trump White House. People were measuring the curtains and measuring the drapes. And
I think if you're president, you can have both.
Yeah,
curtains and drapes. Yeah,
and there was just this confidence that we talked about a lot at the time. And now it's just a very different picture, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different calculation and a different set of choices. And we will, of course, there'll be a lot of analysis that we'll be happy to provide after the election to show sort of where there were strengths and weaknesses in these choices. And we'll see how it all ultimately does play out. I want to give a sense of how Tim Walz is being deployed already. And I mean, it is remarkable how excited audiences are and people are to see Harris and Walz when you contrast it with the lack of enthusiasm for the Biden-Harris ticket and people not really being able to go out and wanting to go out. They couldn't really fill a room, fair to say?
Yeah.
And now they have tens of thousands of people coming out.
People lining up blocks and blocks and blocks. And what's crazy is they're sending JD Vance to like bird dog Harris and Walz on this trip, and it is
so he's like following behind them places, right?
And so they're both of their planes were on the same tarmac in Wisconsin on Wednesday, but it is a disaster because there was this picture yesterday of Vance in Wisconsin, and it was like a very small event, and someone wrote on social media, this could have been an email, as they panned to the crowd, and it was like 35 people. And meanwhile Harris is filling up hangars, and it's like Trump level energy, and so it's an unwelcome contrast for Trump. Even Trump had an event 2 weeks ago in Philadelphia in the same venue that Harris at Temple University, where Harris and Walz made their first appearance. And you compare pictures that this is something that Democrats haven't.
I almost feel like I have to whisper it. Harris has bigger crowd sizes than Trump. Yeah. Like nobody tell Donald Trump because he's really, really touchy about his crowd sizes.
Light up, the bracelets that light up. Like everybody's getting behind this. It seems like.
Well, let's play a little bit of how Tim Walz addressed the crowd on Tuesday when they debuted as a team, and listen for this like happy warrior vibe. He's both trying to be sort of joyful, but also going in for some tough punches. Let's watch.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for the trust you put in me, but maybe more so, thank you for bringing back the joy. Just an observation of mine that I made. I just have to say it. You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy, and yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see. I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So, you see what I did there?
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. What did he do there, James?
Well,
I'm gonna let James explain this.
Well, it's funny.
Rhonda and I look at our phones at this moment, right, Rhonda?
Yeah, I hope my grandma's not watching. People talk about Minnesota Nice, and I think people misunderstand Minnesota Nice, which is that it can have a little bit of an edge. Okay. The couch thing is one of those like cringe things, because what happened was someone posted on social media what they purported to say was a video, or was a chunk, a passage from Hillbilly Elegy, in which JD Vance was talking about performing a sex act on a couch, and it wasn't true. It was not in the book, and it went viral. And it really broke through. And now there are, a lot of Democrats sort of using this. My personal view is that there's a lot of very legitimate attacks that you can level against JD Vance. You don't need to make stuff up. I think it says a lot about our political culture that, people are kind of being sophomoric. On the other hand, a lot of the memes are funny and they are breaking through. I think a lot of voters think that the couch thing did happen, that he did write about it. And you're seeing this kind of mainstream. I mean, the crowd
loved it. The crowd loved it. I mean, but also I think maybe because of who it was coming from. It was coming from like teacher coach guy, right? Who's not supposed to talk like that.
Exactly.
Who's not supposed to get the references.
Yeah. I mean, it's Sarah Palin never actually said, "I can see Alaska from my house," and that became, a lot of people still think that was something Sarah Palin said.
Because Tina Fey parodied it on SNL.
Exactly.
Right?
So I think this is one of those things. That's how comedy and satire work. But it is kind of like, whoa, and it is, you're right. It's the like, wow, I can't believe the teacher just said that. It's not the kids joking in the class, it's the teacher.
Yeah, and it kind of didn't match his bio of being sort of that nice, common man who takes a casserole over to his Midwestern neighbor's house. So maybe there was a little bit of surprise that he came out on his first speech as the VP pick with that type of joke. But it also speaks to all of our politics. And in the last at least the last decade, especially after the Trump administration, and when we heard him say so many things that politicians before would have never touched, it does seem to appear that our politics have reached a level where this stuff has become normal. Low blows have become normal, whether they're believed or not believed. And, you even see ads or you see people running for office who use swear words where that used to not be a thing. And it does speak to where the culture is at right now politically in what they expect from, people running from office to say. And it is an interesting time in that way as well.
It's a really good point, and I'm glad you mentioned Trump, because it is like, there's been a kind of pearl clutching from the right about like, how could Tim Walz say this? And it's sort of like, look at your guy.
Well, I think they're also pearl clutching over weird, right?
Yeah.
Over his use of saying, he's not saying all Republicans are weird by any stretch. He actually counts Republicans as people who will cross the aisle and vote for him, right? He's saying J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are weird.
Yeah.
And there's been some outcry of like, how dare you? But
You're right.
I'm flabbergasted because some of those same people have literally made fun of like me, right? For being like a journalist. Like it's like if you throw the mud, you're gonna get hit by the mud.
Exactly.
So it is a little bit ironic. So, and one thing that Republicans are trying to make fun of now in ads is Kamala Harris's voice, her laugh, and some of that can be very sexist, very racially coded, really trying to make people uncomfortable with the idea of like a strong, powerful, joyful, or maybe out of control, like woman of color, right? So they're trying to use this like dog whistle stuff to just make her something. And that's all part of this too, right? Part of this mudslinging of trying to touch people's buttons about their sort of primal, like what you don't like, what's funny, what's trashy. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah. And again, it does show where society is right now. And think about all the instant gratification that we have. That
we do have a lot.
People just like those short memes and things that make them laugh. But really, there's a lot at stake. And
well, I want to talk about one of those meme moments. So you were talking about how J.D. Vance is really kind of following the Harris-Walz campaign around right now. Both the planes were on the tarmac, as you mentioned, and J.D. Vance was trying to get a lot of attention of saying, I'm going to go over there and talk to the media because they're just, like, Kamala's not even talking to him. Like, they're lonely. And then Kamala Harris's team put out this really effective, great Instagram clip of like doing what you do on TikTok and Instagram, where you take like a prior track and then put some dynamic, footage on it. And they also did their own, like, we're having a party, we're having fun. Look at that weird guy over there. So they are all trying to effectively use social media in ways that captures the attention. It's not all low blow stuff, right? It's also just trying to capture some of that viral energy. I want to talk about how we got here for one more moment. And I want to talk about someone key to all of this, Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
All right, so how much do we see Nancy Pelosi as someone who, though she's no longer the Speaker of the House or even the top Democrat in the House, is still highly influential in the direction of the Democratic Party, Rhonda?
Highly influential. And we've seen her over probably the last month as the decision was being made whether or not Biden should stay in the race. We've seen her be on cable news and in interviews, kind of hinting at, we need to have another nominee. She now will not exactly say she was responsible for pushing Biden out, but she also is delivering a lot of hints that she was instrumental in it. But overall, so, I covered a lot of the Pelosi era as Speaker, and she was the de facto standard bearer for Democrats in the Trump administration. She was the person that was the national Democrat making decisions, and her party got behind her. In the House, she had so much unity. She still commands that unity, even though she does not have the speakership role. I mean, I have seen votes on the House floor that when she votes now, the Democratic caucus claps. Like she commands this attention, this respect, and she is also, outside of her own politics, she is a savvy politician. And she feels that she was reading the cards, she was reading the data, and it just wasn't there for Joe Biden. And she did what she could to make that known to him. But we aren't seeing her say unequivocally that, yes, I'm the one responsible for all of this. I brought you the Harris-Walz ticket. But she is hinting at yes, she still has this role. It's really fascinating to watch her on the Hill and have watched her and see how she sort of created this Democratic caucus to get behind her. And even in the Senate, when she was Speaker of the House, the Senate Democrats also got behind whatever Nancy Pelosi was doing, and that still stands.
Well, she has a new book out, so she's doing a bit of a press tour. I want to play a clip of her on CNN with Dana Bash talking about her relationship with President Joe Biden.
Have you spoken to President Biden since he dropped out?
No, I have not.
Do you hope to?
Yes, I hope to.
Yeah.
We're all busy.
Is everything okay with your relationship?
You'd have to ask him, but I hope
Okay.
so. But he knows. Look, I have loved Joe Biden, respected him for over 40 years.
We're all busy. a little painful. What do we read out of that?
She loves Joe Biden, but she loves Democrats being in the House majority and controlling the White House more. And she made a decision that Joe Biden couldn't win. And, she has been edging closer to saying it publicly. And she even joked in an interview that came out today that maybe she'll write a book just about this few-week period, after publishing this book on her whole career. And she is if not the leader of the Democratic Party. And so I think everyone agrees now among Democrats, except, people very close to Joe Biden, like his family and like 3 or 4 top aides, that Biden wouldn't have been able to beat Trump. And that the only way that Democrats could win this election, and the race is reset and it's still a jump ball, but is if there was a change at the top of the ticket. And more than anyone else, Pelosi deserves credit for orchestrating that. And if Harris wins, it's a huge part of Nancy Pelosi's already storied legacy.
I think part of the tone in that clip, though, is in addition to sort of the not answering really how the relationship is by giving the answer that she did, is that it's an acknowledgement that this was hard, right? This was a hard moment for Joe Biden, for people who do adore him, for people who've been in the trenches with him, for supporters. She does have a tone of respect and recognition, I would say, of the weight of this moment for him.
Yeah, it seems that she's able to play both sides of that she is recognizing that she worked with him for so many years. Of course, he was vice president when she was working on the Hill with the Affordable Care Act. There's other legislation that they've worked closely with. So yeah, she can acknowledge that. But on the other side of that coin, I think Nancy Pelosi, out of anyone who, led the Democrats during the impeachments of Donald Trump, during just the, uncertainty of the times of having a president who was so unconventional, she was leading the Congress through that. She feels he's such a danger that nothing should stand in the way of the Democrats' ability to win again. So,
yeah, to paraphrase the Kamala Harris line, right? We're not going back.
Right.
She does not want to go back. All right, well, stay with us. In just a moment, we'll talk more about how Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are handling the shakeup they've had to deal with over the last couple of weeks. Stay with us. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey with James Hohmann and Rhonda Colvin. How are Trump and Vance handling the shakeup of the last few weeks, James?
Not well. Vance is clearly frustrated. You can tell, having watched his body language for a long time, he feels angrier. He's not enjoying. He got a softball question from a Fox local reporter in Detroit who said, "What brings you joy?"
I love that question.
It's a
Yeah,
great
it was
question.
but it was also that is the easiest question to answer.
And it's just
that's your
softball
relaxing
right
moment,
over the
right?
plate. My kids and my wife.
I mean, if you get that question, you're like, oh, thank God.
I know.
Right?
And he snapped and he was like, "You people," and little press, and and that's something that a losing campaign and a losing candidate does. And I think that speaks volumes. Trump has not been on the campaign trail. I think has clearly been frustrated.
He was snarky to that reporter who was throwing him the softball.
It's crazy.
He was like, I don't love dumb questions from, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm even using a weird accent because it was just so what? No, this is your chance to say, I love my wife.
Yeah.
I
And
love Diet Mountain Dew, whatever you like.
That
It's
Mountain
like,
Dew brings me joy.
yeah.
Anyway.
Anyway.
So
So
I
he's tense.
think he's tense. Trump is clearly frustrated. Trump is I listened to Trump on Fox and Friends earlier this week. He was on for 30 minutes and it was just grievance and like he's not disciplined. He's his team is doing these polls and focus groups and they're telling him not to dwell on the what Trump's calling the coup of taking out Biden because that doesn't win any voters.
Okay, I'm sorry.
over.
The
coup of like Democrats,
Kamala Harris
the
taking
switcheroo.
over. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
I'm like, which coup?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
Okay.
And that's not a message that resonates with voters. It's not like, oh, Democrats put a different candidate in, like they're sneaky, and so it's not a winning message, but it's what Trump is dwelling on because he's angry that he feels like the presidency is being I'm sure in his thinking stolen from him. And so I expect that he's going to do crazier and crazier things to try to get the spotlight back. It does.
To get the spotlight back. Is that effective, Rhonda?
I mean, it may be to his base. I mean, I think we can all anticipate that he will use this switch up as something that he'll claim is interfering in the election, telling his base that this was unfair. Some people may feel that way because it is a bit unprecedented, although we have had, like we've been talking about the Johnson example of how Johnson stepped out of that race back in the 60s. But, I don't know if it's going to be effective. I think what I have heard from Republican voters is that some of them are just tired of just the list of grievances and that being your rallying cry and nothing else. I remember an interview that I had right before the June debate between Biden and Trump with a voter from Pennsylvania who said, I just want to hear Trump talk about what he can do. Like, we're kind of tired of hearing just the grievances and what people have done to him. We need to hear about actual policy. So, I don't know how it'll all work out for Trump. I think right now they're trying to find their footing, which is also interesting because, there was so much reporting that a switch would happen because it was not a secret to anyone. It was all anyone was talking about for like the 2 weeks before the RNC and going into the RNC. So, when it comes to like opposition research and figuring out your strategy, you would think that there's some, paper that was written up by the campaign thinking, okay, well, this is the ways it could go. So I don't know if they're saying they were caught off guard or if they truly were caught off guard. But regardless.
Well, James brought up such a good point. Trump would never have bowed out of the race. And so it was almost inconceivable for Republicans to accept that, like, wait, Biden could actually bow out.
Right.
Or be forced to bow out. I mean, there's the research and there's the Republicans who tell me we got to talk about the economy, inflation, and then there's Trump's lack of discipline and lack of message control. I mean, J.D. Vance seems to want to talk about issues. I don't know, though, if he'll get in his own way, too, just because he's getting frustrated.
Right. And he clearly, J.D. Vance will do what the campaign tells him to do. And it is, he had this stunt where he walked over to Kamala Harris's campaign plane and I think it is one of those Rorschach tests where some people watch that and they're like, oh, what an annoying stunt. And you just know that Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. watch that and think like, yeah, you're sticking it to him, like, and love that. And so it is, you're kind of in some ways playing to an audience of one where you want your running mate to be happy and you want the campaign to be happy. And so Vance is willing to be sort of he'll say whatever Trump wants him to say, but that might be the wrong thing. And I assume Trump is telling Vance things on the phone that are different than what Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita, the top advisors on the campaign, are saying. And Vance has his own team and
his own political
instincts, his own advisors.
So as we're taping this, Donald Trump is doing a press conference. He's about to go do that. We'll be reporting on that later at the Washington Post. An interesting decision because after not talking to the press for a long time, Trump was at NABJ last week. It was sort of a debacle, but he did get a lot of attention for it. He's complaining right now that Kamala Harris isn't talking to the press, or Kamala, as he keeps calling her, misnaming her. And J.D. Vance has been complaining a lot about how Kamala Harris has not talked to the press. Some press is responding. Some press is like, yeah, she hasn't been talking to us. So part out sort of the fact from the fiction here, or the fire and the flames from like the real substance.
Yeah, I mean, as journalists, obviously we like when politicians answer our questions, right? And that's our role. We want people to talk to us
as representatives of
the people. Yeah, exactly. We're trying to inform and educate. Kamala Harris has made a strategic decision that she has these big rallies and these big events, and she doesn't need to go through the filter. She has been chatting off the record on the back of her campaign plane with her traveling press corps, but she hasn't done a sit-down interview yet with Tim Walz. She hasn't given any.
Of course, it's been like a couple of days.
It has. Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine did their first joint interview 48 hours after the rollout. So we're about there. And I could envision.
They also had
a
more prep
sit-down
time.
this weekend.
They also had
did
more
have a lot
vetting
more
time.
prep time.
They had,
Yeah, no, and I actually understand from a political point of view why there's very little upside. But as a journalist, I sort of think like you really ought to go out there and answer questions. There is a debate I can report inside the Harris campaign over how much policy to do. Like, how much do you make this about, just a contrast to Trump? How much do you have great vibes right now. You have the joy, you have the energy. Like, why piss off half your potential supporters by seeking out positions on thorny issues like healthcare or Gaza that say specifically where you're going to be different than Joe Biden? There's not a lot of political upside. On the other hand, there are people in Harris world who say, look, if we want to have a mandate when we win, we can't just run as like, we're going to stop Trump. We need to say what we want to do with the presidency. And then other people are like, well, let's win first. And so I think that tension is very real, and that tension is playing out in the Harris High Command.
Well, there's risk and reward, Rhonda, right? And we call it earned media and unearned media, right? This idea of like you're getting a lot of attention that you haven't had to actually pay for. Trump got this all the time in 2016. He's on TV, it's wall-to-wall coverage. He's not having to spend money for campaign ads. And so there's an idea that if you're getting a lot of coverage, if there's a lot of focus on you, you don't have to take the risky interviews, the one-on-ones. You don't have to push the limits.
That's true. And this week, especially while everyone awaited her VP pick, she's getting the press, she's getting the attention. But there is also, by not doing a sit-down interview or even an open press conference, that there is this sense of, are they being transparent enough? Because when you do decide to do a press conference, open it up to questions, that does show you're not afraid, you're willing to answer questions. So I think her campaign, as James just pointed out, they are really going to have to figure this one out soon. But again, to the point you also made, so I'm in the middle here, that it hasn't been that much time. I mean, she's gone from being the vice president, well, she currently is the vice president, but she was alongside Joe Biden, then not alongside him, and now at the top of the ticket, having just days really to vet a running mate. I mean, it's just rapid fire stuff here. So I guess maybe history will excuse her for not having, a press sit down or anything like that. But I do think that there will come a time where the campaign is going to say, we will have to figure out how to do this.
Yeah. The longer you wait, the more the
pressure
anticipation
builds, yeah.
and
That's
pressure for the eventual news conferences, right? So like,
and then it's
You
like an
can
hour and a half long.
let some air
and
out of the balloon, like talk to some local TV reporters,
Which
like
so JD Vance's event, if it was yesterday, the days are all like both stretching and shrinking, but he was like, I'm taking questions, but first the local reporters. And I have to say those local reporters, they asked great questions. I thought they asked great, smart, cool questions. Sometimes I think the perception is that they'll be the easy questions by the pundits and politicians, but they ask great questions. So yeah, you could do some of that, right? So I will point out that this segment's supposed to be at Donald Trump, and who are we talking about? Kamala Harris. So much like I think when Biden was the nominee and we kept pivoting the conversation back to Trump, it kept just gravitating back. There's a little bit of that happening too, and you can see why Trump and Vance might be very frustrated right now and want them to be doing some tough interviews and want them to be getting more of a microscopic attention rather than just the general attention. Oh, go ahead.
And Trump's, Trump went to NABJ obviously, but like, let's not pretend like Trump is giving interviews to the Washington Post. He's not, he's calling into Fox and Friends and getting the most positive, easy possible interviews.
And the NABJ interview was fraught. They had this battle over fact checking. They ended up being delayed, and then he was trying to blame them for that. Like, it was not exactly like an easy lift.
Trump is accessible. I just want to, I don't want people to leave with the impression that Trump is like giving freewheeling interviews to everyone who asks for them. Like he did in 2016.
But he's not now. Right. Yeah. So I do want to talk about what Donald Trump is choosing to focus on the campaign trail. And to do that, let's play some tape from an event he had in Georgia, where he goes after the sitting governor. And what's surprising about this is the governor is a Republican just like him. Let's listen.
Brad Raffensperger, and Brian Kemp. Raffensperger and Brian Kemp, your governor, who I got elected, by the way. If it wasn't for me, he would not be your governor. I think everybody knows that. He's a very disloyal person, isn't he? Very disloyal. Your governor, Kemp, and Raffensperger are doing everything possible to make 2024 difficult for Republicans to win. What are they doing? I don't know. They got something in mind, you know. They got a little something in mind. Kemp is very bad for the Republican Party. He wouldn't do anything.
So he's talking there about the Republican governor and the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who, of course, were key to the 2020 election, and the fact that Donald Trump believes he had votes that weren't counted or wanted votes counted that could have swung the election his way. None of this is real. None of this is true. And Brad Raffensperger just did his job. Brian Kemp is a conservative Republican. I feel like it's crazy I have to say that. What is he calling for them? First of all, they don't have like a secret plot to like let Democrats win.
Right.
Like what's going on here, guys?
Well, it's
Like a hot potato to like toss into the.
He's fighting the 2020 election. He hasn't let it go.
He hasn't let it go. He's relitigating it. And again, when you speak to voters, when you speak to even national Republicans, a lot will tell you they wish he would stop talking about the 2020 election.
But if you were just plopped down into this and you didn't know all that, would you like? Let's just say you're just you've just come back to Earth from the space station because you got stuck there for a few years, and you're back and you're tuning in and you're like, what are they doing? Like, what are these Republicans doing? Because it sounds so ominous. Like we all get used to how Trump speaks. But it sounds like he's accusing them of something very nefarious.
Mm-hmm. He attacked his wife. He attacked Brian Kemp's wife. Trump did. And so, I mean, what's so wild, it is.
Well,
it's.
I was going to say what's also wild is that Brian Kemp just kind of took it.
Okay. Yes, that's where I was going too. And it is, so Trump got David Perdue, the former senator, to run against Brian Kemp in a Republican primary in 2022. And I think the final margin was like 70-17 or something wild. Like Kemp just crushed Trump's favored candidate. And Kemp is the most popular Republican in the state of Georgia. And yet Kemp says he's going to vote for Donald Trump and says, I wish he wouldn't attack me. I wish he would focus on the issues, but I'm supporting the ticket. And it is, I think Brian Kemp wants to run for Senate against John Ossoff in 2026. And that's what he's setting things up for and wants to unite Republicans. But it is kind of it's the way that all these Republicans who get humiliated by Trump end up just like sort of coming back to him or supporting him. If someone attacked my wife, I would not vote for them for president. I'm just saying.
All right, that's one way to lose an American voter right here, folks. Do not attack James's wife. Stay with us. We're going to talk more about Trump's legal troubles, some of which are in Georgia, and how he's dealing with all that right now on the trail. We are only a few months away from the election, 13 weeks away, and we are still litigating the last election in court, literally litigating the last election. I want to note something that is happening this weekend. Robert Costa of CBS has the first sit-down interview with President Joe Biden since Biden announced that he's not seeking re-election. And a clip that's been going around that CBS has been promoting is Biden saying he has concerns about if Trump loses, it all going peacefully. So there's still a resonant conversation right now about whether or not Trump will accept the results of the 2024 election.
Yeah, and this is something, too, that Biden has said to other journalists. He said it in a New Yorker piece that he is concerned that Trump will not concede, he will continue doing what he has been doing. And even the clip we played about Trump going after the governor of Georgia, that sort of is about the playbook that we've seen, even going back to the Trump and Clinton race. I think it was the month before the election. Actually, you could go back to the RNC of that year, and he started talking about the election is rigged, even before votes were cast. So this is a part of the playbook that Trump does not accept a loss. And Biden has said that he is concerned about it. I thought what was interesting too is I saw a poll done by CNN in July, and it said 7 out of 10 Americans do not believe Trump will concede if he loses the 24 election. So the majority of Americans, which some of those, the 7 out of 10 would likely be Republicans who will vote for him, do not believe he will concede. I mean, we are really in just incredible times here where people don't even trust a candidate to properly concede, and what that means for, political violence, what it means for sowing doubt about the election process in each state. I mean, it just seems like, we don't know what the future will be, but it just doesn't look great in November when it comes to how people will accept the results.
You also just helped me understand something. Of course, what Trump is doing there, where he's complaining in that clip we played earlier about Raffensperger and Kemp, is he's setting it up so that if he does lose Georgia, it's like they've been plotting it all along, right? It's like their fault. Somehow I wasn't understanding where he was going with that.
I just had a thought as Rhonda was talking. We were chatting before we recorded today about the Olympics, and I've been watching a lot of the Olympics, and it is sort of amazing that, and you don't even think about it, that they have these photo finishes where it's half an arm, right? The difference between being a gold medalist and a silver and bronze medalist, and everyone accepts the results. It's and people stand on the medal platform. There's a first, second, third, and people are, for the most part, gracious losers.
And
even
they may
Simone
feel
Biles,
crushed and terrible.
Bowed to the
that was
girl.
so great.
It was a great
yeah,
moment when,
yeah.
and you just compare these Olympic athletes who often are not much older than children, young adults, and to Donald Trump in terms of being a sore loser and sportsmanship. And I thought of that as you were talking.
That's a fantastic example. It really is something we could just, sit and think about for a minute, that you don't have, the silver medalist arguing with the gold medalist on the stage, or, Canada upset at, the US for winning the gold. It does not play out that way. And, but, you look at our politics, and we are seeing that. We're seeing people, even before votes are cast, saying that it's rigged. So, great example.
Where are things with the Trump trials, Rhonda? What are we watching?
Well, one thing we're watching is next week, Judge Chutkan, who is overseeing the federal January 6th case against Trump, she will have a hearing. And that hearing basically is to figure out where do they go from here. Of course, this comes after the Supreme Court's decision ruling on presidential immunity and what is an official act versus what is not. So prosecutors and the defense will have to figure out where they go from here. She's also asking both sides to come up with a timeline for this case. So it does seem like this one's moving ahead. Of course, no one thinks that it'll be summed up by the November election, but it is important to see that there is a hearing on the books now, that they are moving forward. And, it's historical as well, if you think about it, because the defendant is in line to possibly win again, yet they are going along with a case against him, and to see where that goes. So that's happening next week. The other things that have been happening sort of in the Trump legal orbit is there was the fake electors case in Arizona. Jenna Ellis, who was a lawyer on Trump's team, who pled guilty in Fulton County for her role in trying to subvert the election. She is now cooperating with Arizona prosecutors on their case with the fake electors scheme. Trump was not named in that indictment. He was named as an unnamed co-conspirator. But her testimony and cooperation may be helpful in trying to, figure out where they go from there in Arizona, especially when it comes to Giuliani.
That's
as well.
exactly. She can testify against Rudy
She
Giuliani.
says she worked closely with him, so she's able to tell them what she knows.
That's a really important update.
Yeah, I think it is a big development. Remember all those hearings where they were traveling around to state legislatures together, and it was Rudy and Jenna sitting right next to each other.
Yeah.
Let's talk about sentencing. What do we see about that on the horizon?
So it's September 18th.
Marching along.
It's still scheduled in New York. We're waiting for the judge to decide motions, but he hasn't given there's no indication that Justice Marchand is going to postpone that again. So I think there will be some movement, some sentencing. There, of course, Trump can appeal. It could get bogged down, but we should get that next month.
Thank you so much to both of you. Really appreciate you being here this week. We will be, a reminder, heading to Chicago quite soon for the DNC. We'll be bringing you live coverage of that on all Washington Post platforms. Look for us every evening and on the WashingtonPost.com. You can find us in the Post app as well as on YouTube. And then we will be joining you with Sidebar from the convention as well. So watch for us in your feed. A reminder that you can catch us in video form. I'm like, what else do you call that? Corporeal form, human form. You can see us in person on YouTube.
Moving picture.
Moving picture. Thank you. Just look it's back to your Hubert Humphrey era of references. Look for us as the Washington Post on YouTube, and you can also listen to us on your favorite podcast app. I also want to give a shout out to our other podcasts here in the Washington Post. One of them is The Campaign Moment from Aaron Blake. We talked about him as your fellow Minnesotan earlier. And if you are as obsessed with the Olympics as we are, check out The Sports Moment. This is our ticket to the Summer Olympic Games. And even though we're in the games' waning days, you can go back and relive it all with our sports and podcast team. They've been doing such a great job bringing us all these real moments from the Olympics in Paris. So check it out. I'm Libby Casey. We'll see you soon.